Welcome back to our study of the book of Exodus for the spring semester of 2026. Looking at Israel after they crossed the Red Sea. As soon as they crossed, of course, we talked about that the waters closed in on Pharaoh and his army, the chariots, and they were drowned, thus killing off quite a few Egyptians, making Egypt not very powerful at this point. And so subsequently they would not follow after the children of Israel. Of course, seeing what happened to Pharaoh and his army probably stopped a lot of them. But they didn't have the power to be a great nation anymore. And they really never were a great nation anymore. They had certain powers up until the Babylonian captivity. And they went into the Babylonian captivity as well as Israel did. Israel went in for 70 years, they went in for 40 years, but they never came out a great nation after that. And even to this day, they're not considered a great nation, not a powerful nation. They tried to have war against Israel in 1967, and failed miserably at that. And pretty much that's the last we really hear about them, unless there's some current event where Anwar Sadat was assassinated. Of course, that's not current, that was in the 80s. But as far as power, they really have none. And it's probably due to judgment of God upon them for how they did treat Israel. But it says in Exodus 14, thus the Lord saved or delivered Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. They do believe him at this point, and they are celebrating the victory that God gave them. In Exodus 15 says, Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. And then 20:21, Miriam led the women in the book of Exodus to sing the song of celebration. And so for a very short period of time, the people did fear the Lord, and they did believe the Lord, and they believed Moses. However, that wouldn't take very long for that to go away, unfortunately. They get to the waters of Marah, not too far from their crossing of the Red Sea. On your map there you can see the Red Sea here. This here is Israel. Instead of going across on dry land, God wanted them to go a longer distance and go up, and actually the Jordan River would be about right here. Sea of Galilee up here, Jordan River down here. And they would cross the Jordan River, remember in the book of Joshua. But they would go through Edom, Moab, some of those territories. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Thus the name Marah. The word Marah means bitterness. And of course they complained about that, and figured it'd be better for them to have died in Egypt again, murmured against the Lord. The Lord showed Moses a tree, which when he had cast into the waters remained sweet, in Exodus 15:25. And then the promise made, and said, If thou wilt diligently hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon you, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. So all the miracles that were wrought and that destroyed Pharaoh's hope, God promised them if they did the right thing, that they wouldn't suffer any of these things. Of course, if they do the wrong thing, then yes, they would suffer. But there was a promise made. So the problem here was the waters were bitter, and the solution, of course, was purification by God, and the promise that God would bless them if they did the right thing. Not sure what happened there, but continue on. All right. Israel in the wilderness of sin. Now, the word sin, we look at that and we think of sin as in sinning against God. And this is sin as in Sinai. Not, it's just the wilderness of a place called Sin. It's not the Hebrew word for sin, so simply just the name of a place. There, they had a lack of food, and God promised people their physical needs would be met. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and people should go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they walk in my law or no. So this was the test. That 6 days a week, God would provide manna for them to go out and gather up and use for that day. 5 days, it was for that day only. The 6th day, there was a double portion, so it would be enough for 2 days. The Sabbath day portion would be included in that amount. And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as a hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, It is manna, for they wist not what it was. And Moses said to them, This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. And children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came into a land inhabited. They did eat manna until they came unto the borders of the land of Canaan. Now, for some reason we tend to think of this as like a wafer and all, but the Bible tells us a small round thing as small as a hoarfrost on the ground. So it was very tiny, almost can almost say like a grain of some type, the size of it. What it was unique, and we don't have it today by any means. There's no real knowledge of what it actually was, other than a gift from God to test Israel throughout the 40-year journey. So during the wilderness, they were given manna 6 days a week, like I said, and then 5 days of a single portion, 6th day a double portion, to last from the 6th day through the Sabbath day. Manna ceased when Israel entered the Promised Land. So as soon as they got to the crossing of the Jordan River and they entered into the Promised Land, and there was no more manna, picked and eaten the same day for 6 days on the sixth portion, on the 6th, a double portion. Like I said, the word manna, really, all it means is, what is it? Children looked at it and said, what is it? And that's what we'll call it. What is it? We've never seen it before. There was food in the wilderness other than manna. I think some people think that's all the children of Israel had for 40 years. They ate manna and nothing else. They might bake it into bread or cake or some type of thing like that, a loaf, but that's all they had to eat. But the Bible doesn't really say that. I have several verses here. So you probably want to pause the video to write them all down. But they had food in the wilderness. Not only manna, but they had sheep and cattle as they went along. We know they had that. They offered up sacrifices to God. And the priests had a certain portion of that meat to eat. There were some offerings that were completely burned before the Lord, and some were sacrificed unto God and then given to the priest. It says they continued to pass these not only in Sinai, but had them when they reached Edom. So on that journey, I'll go back a couple of screens here to that map. As children of Israel came out of Egypt, Nile River over here, Red Sea here, they cross the Red Sea, get to Marah, Jordan River here, they go up to Edom, somewhere around in here, near Marah, and when they got there, Bible tells us but had them not only have food, sheep and cattle, but had them when they reached Edom in the country east of Jordan. It appears that on some occasions, the Hebrews bought food and even water from the Edomites. So they did not only drink from the water that came from the rock, but apparently could have got water for their animals or what have you. But they did have other things to eat. We see that in Deuteronomy 2, 6, and 7, that wheat and meats. Now, remember the word meat in the Bible doesn't necessarily mean animals. Meat just means food of any type. And so they had wheat and different foods were available as clearly implied in references as Exodus 17:3, Exodus 24:5, Leviticus chapter 8, verse 2, verse 26, and verse 31, chapter 9, verse 4, chapter 10, verse 12, chapter 24, verse 5, and Numbers chapter 7, verse 13 and 19. So there was other things to eat other than when we get there. Was in Numbers, but they ate quail for a while until so much so that says the Bible says it came out their noses because they complained against God. Then the special day, the Sabbath day. In Exodus 16, 23 through 30. And we know the law was given in Exodus 20, but already in 16, 23 it says, and he said to them, this is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that you will bake today, and see that you will seethe, and that which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. So in other words, get all your food prepared before the Sabbath day, and that way you'll be able to have something to eat on the Sabbath day. The Bible mentions many Sabbaths. Sabbath first mentioned in Acts 16:23, as I just read. Apparently for the first 2,500 years of human history, because remember, the Old Testament covers a little over 4,000 year period of time. The law only covers about 1,500. So for 2,500 years of human existence, nobody observed the Sabbath day except for God himself. Remember, God rested on the Sabbath day. Sabbath was then given to Israel. Exodus 31, verse 13, and 31, verse 17. Who previously knew nothing about it. They had no indication of a Sabbath before that. They were never given to the church. It's not for the church to observe. Colossians 2:16, Galatians 4:9 through 11. In fact, the word Sabbath is a Hebrew word which means rest. It doesn't mean seventh day, like we tend to think of, but it means rest, or to cease from work, cessation. The Hebrew words for seven are actually Sheba and Shabbat. Thus, a literal translation, if we were to literally translate Exodus chapter 20, in Ten Commandments, it would say, remember the rest day and keep it holy. Now, since it was a special day, it was given that name Sabbath, to distinguish it just from a time of rest. There are many Sabbaths in Israel. The weekly 7-day Sabbath, as we were just talking about. Sabbath day begins on sundown on Friday and ends sundown on Saturday. The day of absolute rest with no working on that day. The first day of the 7th month was the Sabbath. So you can have more than one Sabbath day in a week. The first day was a Monday, then you'd had your Sabbath day from Friday night to Saturday night, and then if the Sabbath was a Monday, it'd be Monday night to Tuesday night. Leviticus 23, 24th, and 25. The Feast of Trumpets, which is on the 7th month, first day of the 7th month. Then the 10th day of the 7th month, Yom Kippur, was a Sabbath day as well. So I'd say it doesn't matter which day of week it falls on. I mean, January the 1st is what day of the week? Well, it differs every year. So what's the first day of the 7th month? Well, it differs every year. So like I said, if the first day of the 7th month was a Thursday, then you'd have a Thursday and Friday Sabbath, one right after the other. 10th day of the 7th month is the Sabbath day, again, the day Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement. Then the 15th day of the 7th month was the Feast of Tabernacles. So now this, just the 7th month alone, we have 3 unique Sabbaths, not counting the regular 4 Sabbaths. The 7th year Sabbath, Leviticus 25, the land was to be idle for an entire year. God told them to farm the land for 5 years, and then 6 years to farm it, and whatever they had gathered every year, God would give them a double portion for the 6th year. So enough to last to where they didn't work the land for that entire 7th year. Then the 50th year Sabbath, this was for the year of Jubilee. The 70-year captivity was primarily due to Israel's disobedience to observe these rest years. By not working for, well, in approximately 490 years, they had accumulated 490 years they accumulated until Israel owed the Promised Land 7 years of rest. Now, these 490 years didn't come in a row. It wasn't like when they went in captivity began in 606. So if you add 490 years to that, it'd be 1090. It wasn't from 1090 to 606 that they failed to honor the Sabbath year. What happened was probably during the time of Joshua, they honored the Sabbath year, took a 7th year off. During the time of the Judges, 305-year period of Judges, they probably did not honor the Sabbath year, maybe even up until David became king. And I'm just speculating here, but I doubt Saul would have honored the Sabbath year. And the children of Israel, probably as a nation, since they weren't led by a ruler, didn't honor it before Saul. When Solomon became king, he may have honored it for a couple of times. He reigned 40 years, so who knows. But when the kingdom split, during the good kings, they may have kept the Sabbath year. During the bad kings, they probably didn't. So nevertheless, over a period of time from the Exodus to the captivity, over that period of time, there were 70 Sabbath years that were not kept. And so when God sent them in captivity, God basically says, you owe me 70 years, I'm going to collect them now by kicking you out of the country for 70 years. So in essence, you pay your tithes whether you think you do or not. You either give it to God and God blesses you, or you don't give it to God and God takes it and you don't get a blessing. Let's see this passage here regarding that time period. Jeremiah talks about that they owed God for the 70 years. Sabbath worship ended with the church age. So it has never been changed. So it's always been, the 7th day has always been Friday night to Saturday night. Sunday is not the Sabbath, never has been, never will be. Most people call Saturday the Sabbath, but technically it is Friday night to Saturday night. Matthew 21:43, God said, therefore say unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you and given to a nation, bringing forth the fruits thereof. So when Israel was taken out and the church was replaced, then the Sabbath worship ended. For now, anyway. It will begin again. Sabbath will be observed again during the millennial kingdom. So during the church age, no Sabbath. During tribulation, no Sabbath. For obvious reasons for that one. During the millennial kingdom, Isaiah prophesied, it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. So the Sabbath worship will be reinstituted during the millennial kingdom. So why do we worship on Sunday then? Well, the authority was laid out in pattern through the resurrection, which was the first day of the week, or Sunday. And this Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all attest to the resurrection being on Sunday. Matthew 28:1, Mark 16, verses 2 and 9, Luke 24, verses 1 and 13, and John 20, verse 1 and verse 19. So, and the seventh day also commemorates the finished creation. So Exodus 20, 8 through 11. So the first day commemorates the finished redemption. So it's the first day completed creation. The first day here, first day completes creation. Seventh day was creation. First day for redemption. And we see that in Acts 20, verse 7, 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1 and 2, and then Hebrews 7, verse 12. It's true that Paul often preached to the Jews on the Sabbath day, but there was a good reason for that, because that's where the Jews were gathered together at. So he only did so because this was the day the Jews regularly gathered together. I'm sure that's hard to see on your screen there. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 and 20. So 1 Corinthians 9, 19 and 20. Last mention of the Sabbath day is found in Colossians 2:16. Let no man therefore judge you in which you eat or drink, or in respect of a holy day, or on the new moons, or on the Sabbath days. Meaning what? Well, can we worship on the Sabbath day today? Absolutely. If you go to Israel Day and you go to a good Bible-believing church in Israel, you will meet on the Sabbath day. Because that's the day that they take off work. Used to be the day in this country everybody took off work was Sunday, and it was patterned after the Sunday worship. Of course, the New Testament saints, to worship on a Sunday was a huge deal for them. For us, it's no big deal, it's no sacrifice. But for them it was, because it clearly divided them between the Jews. So if the Jews saw people worshiping on Sunday instead of the Sabbath day, I'm sure it really upset them, and they caused great persecution upon the church. But whatever day the church wants to meet, if a church wants to meet on Saturday, that's fine. As I said, Colossians 2:16 said, don't let anybody judge you on what day you worship, what day you celebrate. If you celebrate on Saturday, fine. Sunday, fine. Monday, fine. Doesn't make any difference. What God wants to do is to celebrate Him and worship Him, not only one day a week, but throughout all 7 days of the week. But we gather together on certain days, whether it's Sunday, and some churches have a Wednesday night service. Our church has a Wednesday morning and Wednesday night. Some churches have Thursday night service, and any one of those is fine. Some churches have meetings on Sunday morning and Sunday night, some don't. We can't say what's right and what's wrong. We have to go to Colossians 2:16 and use that as our guide. And if we don't agree with what another church is doing, then we just don't go to that church. If you demand your services to be on certain days of the week, then I suppose you go to those, but you need to make sure you know why you're demanding that, and not just because of tradition. Israel then at Rephidim. The rock was struck opened by Moses. He struck the rock with his rod. And of course this is where the water started streaming from the rock. A great miracle, no doubt. Enough water for the children of Israel as they traveled along. I'm sure where they found fresh water, they could drink of that. But when there was no fresh water, God supplied water from the rock. As mentioned before, at Edom, it seems to allude to the fact that they got water from the Edomites. And so, again, we don't have to believe that they drank of that rock water every single day, but only when there was no other water available. But nevertheless, a great miracle. Either way you look at it, a huge, huge miracle. Enough to feed, or to give drink to 2 to 3 million Jews, depending on how many there were. This all began at Rephidim. In 1 Corinthians 10, chapter 10, verse 1 through 4, we see that rock was a type of Christ. Now, I'm not big on types in the Bible and saying that this always represents this or this represents that. Only where the Bible explains it do I believe that there's a type. And I do obviously believe this is a type because it says, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all did drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." So the rock apparently moved along with them through the wilderness. How does that work? I don't know. It'd be wonderful to see how God did that. But remember, God can do anything. Twice Moses struck the rock, first at Rephidim, and the second 40 years later, northeast of Kadesh. Now, this is significant, again, to prove that the rock followed them. Because if the rock just supplied water, and the water came from the rock, and the water followed them, then why would Moses, when he got mad and struck the rock a second time, he would have had to run back to Rephidim. But he was at Kadesh, which actually means holy. So he was at the holy place, and he ran all the way back to Rephidim to strike the rock? No. He failed in regards to striking the rock the second time. During the wilderness journey, the children of Israel had quite a few enemies. The Amalekites was one of the main enemies. And the Amalekites is a recurring theme throughout the Old Testament, enemies against Israel. They were the enemy during the wilderness journey. In Exodus 17, and Moses said unto Joshua, "Choose us out men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand." So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. It came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. When he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone, put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hand. So Aaron held up one hand, Hur held up the other hand, one on one side and one on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So God allowed victory as long as Moses held his hands up. His hands got tired, Aaron and Hur held them up for him. And held them up until nightfall, going down in the sun, to give them the great victory. Exodus 18, the children of Israel will reach Mount Sinai. Somewhere around 1445 BC, Israel arrives at Mount Sinai. And they will remain there for 11 months and 5 days. And of course, 3 very significant events occur during this time. The Constitution of Israel, which is the law of God, that described the requirements for fellowship. The prostitution of Israel, When Moses was up and he came back down, the children of Israel had already gone to making the golden calf. So the prostitution of Israel was when the golden calf was made, that destroyed their fellowship. And then very importantly, the restitution of Israel. And that's the tabernacle, during the restoration of fellowship. So they were in fellowship with God. God gave them commands to follow, the commands of God, the 10 Commandments. They failed in that response, started worshiping golden calf, broke the fellowship. God gave them a tabernacle to restore the fellowship. The great mercy of God that is just so absolutely amazing, that what God will do to give us fellowship with Him. In spite of our many shortcomings, God wants us to have fellowship with Him. We'll talk more about this next time.